"Mala, your apartment is perfect for Rena and her husband. They'll be moving in soon. You don't mind, right?" The words sliced through the phone, casual and final. My mother wasn't asking. She was announcing the giveaway of my life's work as if she were deciding what to have for dinner. For a heart-stopping moment, the world went silent. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. My eyes shot to the stack of legal lease agreements on my desk, proof of the life I had painstakingly built within those walls. She thought the apartment was an empty gift to be handed over. She had no idea who really lived there, what those contracts represented, or the unshakable foundation I had laid brick by brick. And when she found out, her perfect little plan for her favorite daughter was going to shatter into a million pieces. She was about to learn that the quiet, overlooked child she had always known was gone, and in her place stood a woman who would not be moved. From the moment Mala could remember, the world in her family home was tilted. Her younger sister Rena was the sun, and everyone else simply orbited her. Rena always wore the brightest dresses, the ones that swirled with color and caught every eye in the room. On birthdays, Rena's cakes were grand multi-layered creations, while Mala's own special day often slipped by with little more than a quiet acknowledgement. When the latest phones were released, one would magically appear in Rena's hands, sometimes without her even having to ask. Mala, meanwhile, made do with their screens cracked and their buttons worn from use. Mala grew up in the shadow of her sister's glow, listening to her mother and relatives shower Rena with endless praise. They clapped for her smallest accomplishments, cooing, "Our smart one, our beautiful girl." But when Mala came home with excellent grades, her report cards were often pushed aside on the kitchen table, lost in the happy noise surrounding whatever new thing Rena had done. Mala learned a hard lesson early on. If she wanted anything, even the slightest bit of attention, she had to work twice as hard. And even then, it was never enough to pay for her own school supplies and the small necessities her parents overlooked. Mala started taking on odd jobs after her classes. She scrubbed floors, worked shifts in local shops, and ran errands for neighbors, all to earn a little money of her own. She would return home, exhausted, bones aching, hoping her mother might notice her effort. Instead, she was often met with a casual instruction to hand over her earnings to help with household expenses, or, more often than not, to buy something Rena had her eye on. Her hard-earned money was never truly her own. Every time Mala tried to stand a little taller, her mother's favoritism would gently but firmly push her back down. When Rena expressed a desire, it was fulfilled almost instantly. When Mala asked for something, the answer was always the same: "Later, Mala, not now. Can't you see we have other priorities?" Those other priorities were always, without fail, Rena. The memory that stung the most was the day she desperately needed new shoes for school. Her only pair was so worn that the soles were flapping, and walking to school was a daily embarrassment. She pleaded with her mother for just one new pair. Her mother looked at her, her expression unmoved, and said, "Rena needs a new pair, too. Let's get hers first." That same week, Rena came home with shiny, new shoes, while Mala was forced to continue wearing her broken ones. It was a cycle that repeated endlessly. Rena's wants were treated as urgent needs, while Mala's actual needs were dismissed as minor inconveniences. This constant unfairness didn't break her. Instead, it slowly forged something powerful inside her, a quiet mix of strength, silence, and unwavering determination. She decided then that she would stop waiting for her family to see her. If they were blind to her sacrifices, she would build a life so solid, so undeniable, that they would have no choice but to look. What her mother and Rena never understood was that the years they spent ignoring her were the very years she spent learning how to fight, how to survive, and how to create something that no one could ever take away from her again. Mala often drifted back to the years. She began building the apartment. She was young, but her heart was heavy with the resolve of someone who had been invisible for far too long. She had made a solemn promise to herself. She would not wait for anyone to provide her with security or a place to call her own. She would build it herself, even if it cost her everything. That single thought became her guiding star, her fuel, and her only source of comfort. Every job she took, every single coin she managed to save, was tucked away into a small, worn envelope she kept hidden beneath her mattress. While girls her age were spending their money on new clothes, movies, or small pleasures, Mala practiced a discipline that was almost painful. She skipped meals, said no to every invitation, and wore the same few outfits for years until they were faded and thin. Each time she added a few more notes to her envelope, she would whisper to herself, "One day, this will be my home." It was a lonely and difficult path, but her burning desire to be free, from her family's dismissive gaze propelled her forward. When she had finally saved enough to buy a small plot of land, Mala walked into the property office, her hands trembling but her spirit resolute. The office staff glanced at her, their expressions a mixture of surprise and skepticism, unable to believe that a young woman like her could afford such a purchase. But she signed the documents with a surge of pride, her name written in bold, clear letters under the word owner. It was the first time she had ever felt truly seen, even if it was just on a piece of paper. Constructing the building was an even greater challenge. Mala couldn't afford a team of expensive builders or the best materials all at once, so she built it piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck. One month's salary went to bricks, the next to cement, another to pay a single laborer for a few days' work. Many nights, she would stand before the unfinished structure, a silhouette against the moon, watching it slowly, painstakingly take form. Through rain and blistering sun, she would visit the site, checking every detail, reminding herself that this was more than just a building. It was her defiant answer to a lifetime of being overlooked. There were moments when she collapsed in tears, overwhelmed by exhaustion, times when she doubted if she could ever see it through to the end, but in those dark moments, she would summon the memories of every time her needs were ignored. Every time her voice was silenced in her own home, that pain was transformed into fire. She was no longer the invisible daughter. Each wall that rose from the ground was her voice finally taking a solid, unshakable form. Years later, when the apartment building stood complete, Mala didn't just see bricks and mortar. She saw every grueling shift she had worked, every meal she had skipped, and every dream she had clutched to her chest when no one else in the world believed in her. It was her tangible proof that even a forgotten child could build something powerful, and deep within her soul, she knew with absolute certainty that no one, not even her own mother, had the right to take it away. Mala's mother spoke of the apartment as if it were an empty, waiting shell, ready to be gifted to Rena. But the reality was a world away from her mother's ignorant assumption. The apartment wasn't just a property Mala owned. It was a vibrant, living place. Families had made their homes there. The sound of children's laughter echoed in the hallways, and hardworking men and women rested their heads there each night, secure in the knowledge that they had a safe place to live. Every room held a story, and every tenant had placed their trust in Mala. From the moment the final nail was hammered in, Mala had decided the apartment would not stand idle. She had sacrificed too much for it to be just an empty monument to her struggle. She poured her effort into making it a true home for others. She was careful in selecting her tenants, often choosing people who, like her, were seeking stability and a fair chance. They signed legally binding contracts with her, each document a formal declaration with her name printed clearly as landlord. Those papers were more than just administrative necessities. They were her shield, her legal fortress against anyone who might try to push her aside. Every month, the rent was paid directly to her, and she used that income to meticulously maintain the building. The water always ran hot, the lights never flickered, and any request for repairs was handled promptly. She treated her tenants not as sources of income but as people who deserved respect, and they, in turn, respected her deeply. Some of the older residents affectionately called her Sister Mala, because she was a fair and kind landlord, a stark contrast to others who only cared about profit. So when her mother so casually announced she was giving the apartment to Rena, Mala nearly laughed at the sheer absurdity of it. How could anyone simply walk into a building bustling with tenants and claim it as their own? These weren't just empty walls to be occupied. This was a functioning community, and Mala knew her tenants would stand by her, their lives and homes intertwined with hers. Rena and her husband were picturing an easy takeover. They imagined themselves strolling in with their luggage, choosing the best rooms for themselves. But Mala knew better. She had a drawer full of signed, sealed, and legally enforceable contracts. No one could just wave a hand and make those agreements disappear. If her mother or sister wanted a fight, Mala had only to present those papers, the undeniable proof that she was not only the owner but was also bound by law to protect the families who lived there. What her family utterly failed to grasp was that the apartment was never just about bricks and money. It was about people. It was about the community and the trust Mala had carefully cultivated. Each tenant was a living testament to the fact that she had created something that mattered, and that trust gave her a strength they could never comprehend. She was no longer just the overlooked daughter. She was the landlord, the manager, and the protector of a dozen homes. And no one was going to take that away from her. One bright afternoon, a sharp knock echoed from the main gate of her apartment building. When Mala opened it, her breath caught in her throat. There stood Rena and her husband, their faces beaming with an unshakable confidence. each pulling a large, heavy suitcase. They looked like tourists arriving at a resort, not like people showing up unannounced at someone else's property. Without so much as a proper greeting, Rena declared, "We're here. Mom said this place is perfect for us, so we've come to move in." Mala's heart plummeted. She had clung to the hope that her mother's phone call was just talk, a thoughtless comment that would eventually fade. But this was real. Rena and her husband had taken her mother's words as gospel. They stood at the entrance as if they held the deed in their hands. When Mala calmly tried to stop them, explaining that every unit was occupied, Rena just waved a dismissive hand and let out a light laugh, as if Mala's words were a silly, inconsequential joke. Her husband chimed in, brushing aside her protest with a grin. "Don't worry, we'll manage. Once people know we're family, they'll understand." He spoke as if tenants were disposable. As if their legal contracts and their right to a home meant nothing when weighed against a mother's casual promise. They carried themselves with an astonishing level of entitlement, absolutely certain that their mother's blessing was all the authority they needed to override laws, documents, and basic human decency. Mala stood her ground, her body physically blocking the doorway. Her voice remained firm but calm. She repeated that the apartment was fully occupied, that families had built their lives there, and that it was not some empty space for the taking. Instead of listening, Rena smirked. "Mala, stop being so difficult. You've always had a habit of making things bigger than they are. Mom said this place is ours now, so why are you making problems?" The arrogance in her sister's voice was a familiar sting, the same tone Mala had endured her entire life. It was the tone of someone who had never been denied anything. Rena pushed her suitcase forward an inch, as if daring Mala to physically stop her. Her husband stood beside her, a smug look on his face, completely sure of their victory because his mother-in-law had sanctioned their move. Inside, a storm of anger was brewing in Mala's chest, but she refused to let it show. She reminded herself that she had more than just her anger. She had proof. She had contracts. She had the law. Rena and her husband could stand there with their suitcases and their misplaced confidence all day. But Mala knew the truth. This was not their playground. This was her fortress, built on a foundation of her own sweat, sacrifice, and resilience. As she stood at that gate, unmoving, she realized this was more than just an argument. It was the moment she finally drew the line, the moment she would show her sister, her mother, and the world that the invisible girl was finally, irrevocably, in charge of her own life. Mala didn't shout. She didn't argue. Instead, she turned, walked back to her small ground-floor office, and returned with a crisp, neat folder in her hand. Rena and her husband were still standing at the entrance with their suitcases, their smiles just beginning to waver with impatience. Mala placed the folder on a small table near the door and opened it with deliberate slowness. Inside lay the signed rental agreements, each one officially stamped and sealed, each one bearing her name as the landlord. She carefully lifted one of the documents and held it out for them to see. "Do you see this?" she asked, her voice quiet but ringing with authority. "Every single apartment in this building is legally rented. These families pay their rent to me every month. This place isn't an empty plot of land you can just claim. It is not yours. It is my livelihood." Rena let out a nervous laugh, trying to brush it off. "Mala, you're being so serious. We're family. We can work something out with the tenants. You know Mom already gave us her word." But Mala just shook her head, her gaze unwavering. Her voice didn't rise, yet it carried a weight that crushed Rena's forced laughter into silence. "No, Rena, this is not our childhood home where you can take my things whenever you please. I built this place with years of my own sacrifice. Every single brick here holds my sweat. If you and your husband want a home, then you should go and build one, just like I did. Do not expect me to hand you mine." Her words hung in the air like heavy stones. For the very first time, the confident smiles vanished completely from the faces of Rena and her husband. The entitlement they had worn like a cloak began to fray. They exchanged an uneasy glance, clearly shaken but still not ready to admit defeat. Her husband tried one last time, his voice weaker now. "But your mother promised us. She told us this would be ours." Mala looked him directly in the eye, her tone sharp and final. "My mother did not build this. I did. A promise she made holds no power here. These papers are the only promises that matter, and my promise is to the tenants who trust me to keep this roof over their heads. Do you honestly believe I would betray them for your convenience?" The silence that followed was thick and absolute. A few tenants, who had been watching the scene unfold from their windows, began whispering to one another, nodding in approval of Mala's strength. Rena shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the reality of the situation finally dawning on her. This was not going to be the easy victory she had imagined. In that moment, Mala had drawn a line not in sand, but in solid stone. There was no room for negotiation, no opening for guilt. Her family's favoritism had shadowed her for her entire life, but it had no power here. Not in this home she had built with her own 2 hands. The message was crystal clear. Mala was no longer the invisible child they could push around. Here, she was the one who made the rules.